That night, Armin couldn't sleep. Memories rearranged themselves in his mind, taking on new meanings. His mother's sadness, her protectiveness, her fear. He understood her choice, but understanding did not erase the ache. Weeks later, Armin found himself standing at a bus station, a small bag at his feet. He had decided to search for the man whose absence had shaped his life. It felt reckless and necessary all at once. The journey took him through cities and villages, through stories and dead ends. He worked odd jobs, listened carefully, followed faint leads. Along the way, he met people who mirrored his own search in different ways, each of them carrying something broken and hopeful inside. One evening, in a coastal town where the sea smelled of salt and old stories, Armin finally found him. Karim was older, thinner, his hair gray, his hands rough from years of labor. He was repairing a fishing net when Armin approached. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Recognition flickered in Karim's eyes, followed by something like regret. "I wondered if this day would come," Karim said quietly. They sat by the water as the sun sank into the sea. Karim spoke of fear, of youth, of mistakes made when he had been too weak to face responsibility. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not excuse himself. "I don't expect you to call me father," he said. "I just want you to know that leaving was the greatest failure of my life." Armin listened, the anger he had carried slowly transforming into something heavier and more complex. He realized then that confronting the truth was not about fixing the past, but about freeing himself from it. When he left the next morning, there were no promises, no dramatic reconciliations. Just a quiet understanding. Armin returned to his mother's house months later. The town welcomed him back as if he had never left. He stood in the yard one evening, watching the sky darken, feeling a sense of calm he had not known before. He had not found all the answers he once thought he needed. But he had found something else, something steadier. A sense of who he was, shaped not just by loss and silence, but by choice. Inside the house, he placed his mother's photograph on the shelf, beside the letter. He whispered a thank you into the quiet room. The promise he had written as a boy echoed in his mind. "I will not become someone who forgets who he is." Both a stranger and a ghost. One afternoon, he found himself standing outside the old repair shop where his father had worked for decades. The owner, an elderly man with kind eyes, recognized him instantly. "You look like him," the man said. "Especially when you frown." Ion smiled weakly. "He spoke of you often," the man continued. "Not in front of others. Only when he thought no one was listening." That night, Ion returned home carrying a weight that was slowly shifting shape. Regret remained, but understanding had begun to grow around it. As he continued reading the journal, he discovered something unexpected. His father had once been offered a chance to leave the town, to work in the city. He had turned it down after Ion was born. "I chose certainty over dreams," the journal read. "I hope my son forgives me for the life I couldn't give him." The realization struck Ion deeply. The man he had resented had sacrificed silently, believing he was protecting his family. One evening, Sana joined Ion on the roof. The sky burned with the colors of sunset, just as it had when they were children. "He missed you," she said quietly. "He never stopped hoping you'd come back." "I was angry for so long," Ion replied. "I thought he never believed in me." "He did," Sana said. "He just didn't know how to show it." That night, Ion dreamed of his father for the first time in years. They were sitting together, not speaking, just watching the road. When Ion woke, his pillow was wet with tears, but his chest felt lighter. A week later, Ion made a decision that surprised even himself. He turned down the job offer waiting for him in the city. Instead, he chose to stay a little longer, helping Sana settle things, repairing the house, reconnecting with the town that had shaped him. One afternoon, while fixing a broken shelf, he found a folded letter tucked behind it. His name was written on it. "I never learned how to say these things out loud. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and maybe you are ready to hear them. I was proud of you, even when I didn't show it. I argued because I was afraid of losing you to a world I did not understand. Forgive me, and live the life I was too afraid to live." Ion sank to the floor, the letter clutched in his hand. For the first time since his return, he allowed himself to cry fully, without restraint. The grief came in waves, but so did something else. Release. In the weeks that followed, Ion began to see the town differently. He noticed its quiet resilience, the way people helped one another without being asked. He volunteered at the local school, teaching children the skills he had learned in the city. Their curiosity reignited something inside him. One evening, as he walked home under a sky full of stars, Ion realized he was no longer running. The anger that had driven him for so many years had softened into clarity. On the anniversary of his father's death, Ion stood by the grave alone. He placed the journal and letter together beneath a small stone. "I understand now," he said softly. "I wish I had understood sooner." The wind rustled through the trees, and for the first time, the silence felt gentle. Months later, Ion opened a small workshop in the town, combining modern skills with traditional work. It wasn't the future he had once imagined, but it was one that felt honest. Sana smiled more. The house felt alive again. Some nights, Ion still felt the ache of loss, but it no longer consumed him. It reminded him to stay present, to speak the words that mattered before it was too late. Standing by the window where his father once sat, Ion watched the road stretch into the distance. He no longer saw it as a path of escape, but as a connection between who he had been and who he was. When the train stopped at the small, forgotten station, Ion felt something tighten inside his chest. The platform looked exactly as it had in his childhood memories: cracked concrete, a single flickering bulb, and the smell of dust mixed with damp earth. He stepped down with one worn bag in his hand, the metal of the train groaning as it pulled away, leaving him alone with a silence that felt heavier than noise. He had not planned to return like this. In his mind, coming back was something reserved for success, for pride, for a version of himself that had proven something to the world. Instead, he had returned because his sister's voice on the phone had been shaking as she said their father was gone. Just like that. A stroke. No warning. No last words. As Ion walked toward the road, his shoes crunching against gravel, memories rose uninvited. His father's voice calling him home before sunset. The sound of his mother's bangles clinking as she worked in the kitchen. The arguments, too, sharp and unresolved, especially the last one. Ion had left that night without looking back, convinced he was right, convinced there would be time to make peace later. There wasn't. The house stood at the end of the lane, smaller than he remembered, its paint faded, the gate slightly crooked. His sister, Sana, opened the door before he could knock. Her eyes were red, her face thinner, but when she saw him, she wrapped her arms around him tightly, as if afraid he might disappear again. "You came," she whispered. "I'm sorry," was all he managed to say. Inside, the house felt hollow. Their father's slippers lay near the door, untouched. The air carried the faint smell of old books and tea leaves. Ion's gaze fell on the chair near the window, where his father used to sit every evening, watching the street as if waiting for something that never arrived. The funeral passed in a blur. Neighbors came and went, offering condolences that sounded distant and rehearsed. Ion stood beside the grave, his hands trembling as the earth fell onto the wooden coffin. With each dull thud, guilt pressed deeper into his chest. He had imagined this moment once, angrily, during their worst argument, but imagination had not prepared him for the finality of it. That night, sleep refused to come. Ion lay on his childhood bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it creaked softly. He remembered the day he had left. His father had stood in this very doorway, his face unreadable. "If you walk out now," his father had said, "don't expect the road to be kind." Ion had laughed bitterly. "I'll make my own road." Now the words echoed like a curse. The next morning, Sana asked him to help sort through their father's belongings. Ion hesitated but agreed. They opened drawers filled with folded clothes, old receipts, and letters written in careful handwriting. In the bottom of a locked cabinet, they found a small wooden box. Sana handed it to him. "He always said this was yours," she said. "But he never gave it to you." Inside the box was a notebook, its pages yellowed with age. Ion recognized it instantly. It was his father's journal. His hands shook as he opened it. The entries were simple, written after long days of work, filled with observations about the weather, the town, and his children. Then Ion reached a page where his own name appeared. "I don't know how to reach my son anymore. Every word turns into an argument. I see his fire, his hunger, and I am afraid. Not of him, but for him. I was never brave enough to chase my dreams. I fear he will be brave and get hurt." Ion closed the book, tears blurring his vision. He had never known his father carried such thoughts. He had seen only control, only disapproval. Days passed. Ion delayed his return to the city, unsure of what he was returning to anyway. He walked through the town, greeting familiar faces, feeling like. The night his mother died, the power went out across the entire neighborhood, as if the city itself had decided to mourn in darkness. Armin stood in the narrow hospital corridor with his back against the cold wall, staring at his reflection in the black glass of a window. He was 32 years old and felt older than the building around him. When the doctor finally stepped out, his eyes already said what his mouth would confirm. Words were spoken, condolences offered, a hand briefly placed on Armin's shoulder, then silence again. A silence so heavy it felt like something alive had wrapped itself around his chest. He did not cry then. He nodded, thanked the doctor, and walked into the room where his mother lay still, her face calm in a way he had never seen while she was alive. All her worries, all her sacrifices, seemed to have dissolved into that stillness. Armin sat beside her and held her hand, warm only in memory. The power outage meant the machines were quiet now, no beeping, no hum, just the sound of his own breathing and the rain tapping softly against the window. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though he didn't know exactly for what. For leaving home too early, for not calling often enough, for believing he had more time. Outside, the rain thickened, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and red. Somewhere in that city was the life Armin had built, a life that now felt fragile and strangely unreal. He had come back to this town only because his mother had been sick, and now that reason was gone. The funeral was small, as she had wanted. Old neighbors came, people who remembered Armin as a boy running barefoot through the streets, his knees always scraped, his pockets full of stones and dreams. They hugged him, spoke softly, told him his mother had been a good woman. He nodded again, thanked them again, the words passing through him without leaving a mark. After everyone left, Armin stayed by the grave until dusk. The sky burned orange, then purple, then sank into night. He felt something shift inside him then, a quiet decision forming without words. He did not want to return to his apartment, to his job, to the life that suddenly felt like borrowed clothes. Not yet. His mother's house stood at the end of a narrow street, paint peeling, gate rusted, exactly as he remembered. Inside, everything smelled of her. Soap, tea leaves, old books. Armin walked from room to room, touching the walls, the furniture, as if memorizing the place for the last time. In his childhood bedroom, he found a box under the bed. Inside were old notebooks, drawings, letters he had written to himself when he was young. One page caught his attention. It was a promise, written in uneven handwriting. "I will not become someone who forgets who he is." Armin sat on the bed and laughed quietly, a sound that surprised him. He had forgotten that promise. Somewhere between ambition and survival, he had let it slip away. The next morning, he woke before sunrise. The town was quiet, the air cool and clean. He made tea the way his mother used to and sat by the window. For the first time in years, he had nowhere to be. The thought scared him, but it also felt like freedom. Days turned into weeks. Armin postponed his return again and again. He repaired the house, cleaned the yard, spoke to neighbors. He listened to their stories, stories of loss and endurance, of small joys. He found himself helping an old man fix a roof, teaching a child how to ride a bicycle. At night, he slept deeply, dreaming of things he had long buried. One evening, as he was closing the gate, he noticed a woman standing across the street. She was watching the house, her expression unreadable. When she saw him notice her, she hesitated, then crossed the road. "You're Sophia's son," she said. "Yes," Armin replied. "Armin." She nodded. "I'm Lena. I used to live here, next door. Before I moved away." He studied her face, trying to place it in his memory. Something about her eyes felt familiar. "I found this while packing my things," she said, holding out a small envelope. "Your mother gave it to me years ago. She told me to give it to you if I ever saw you again." Armin took the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. His name was written on it in his mother's careful handwriting. That night, he sat at the kitchen table and opened it. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The photograph showed a younger version of his mother, standing beside a man Armin had never seen before. They were smiling, close. The letter was short. "There are truths I never had the courage to say. Not because I didn't love you, but because I was afraid of hurting you. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and maybe you are ready. Forgive me. Armin's heart pounded. He read the letter again and again, searching for answers that weren't there. The next day, he went to Lena's house. She lived alone in a small apartment above a bakery. The smell of bread filled the stairwell. She listened as he spoke, her face softening with each word. The man in the photograph, she said gently. His name was Kareem. He was your father. The world seemed to tilt. Armin had grown up believing his father had died before he was born. It was a story his mother rarely spoke of. He didn't die, Lena continued. He left. And your mother never recovered from that, but she never stopped loving you. Armin felt anger rise, sharp and hot. Anger at a man he had never known, at a truth hidden from him, at a life shaped by silence. Where is he now? Armin asked. I don't know, Lena said. But I know why your mother kept it from you. She was afraid you'd go looking for him and get hurt.